Well, good morning, everyone. I can't tell you how delighted I am to actually be here this morning and actually be here and be able to talk to you, which I haven't been able to do for the last 2 days. So this is a vast improvement. But it's good to see you and good to see you energized this morning and up and ready. Thank you for getting us started. And I'm joined by a very distinguished panel who I'm going to let introduce themselves briefly, and then we will jump in.
Hi, everyone. Debra Zabloudil, and I'm the president and CEO of the Learning Studio out of Chicago, Illinois, in the States.
Good morning. I'm MaryLynn Fayoumi, and I'm the president and CEO of the Management Association, the HR source for employers, also in the Chicagoland area.
Hi, I'm Vicki Loise. I'm the CEO for the Society for Laboratory Automation and Screening, also outside of Chicago.
So what, of course, is what we're talking about is kind of how did you get into this and how do you keep growing in our industry of association management in this kind of fascinating field we're in. And many of us, particularly at my age, fell into it because this wasn't really a profession that most of us knew about. That's luckily changed in many parts of the world where there now is professional education and association management, but that hasn't always been the case. And what's fascinating is how we all came at it and how we find our passion to grow within this industry and keep growing within the industry. So that's really what I want to have our three panelists speak about for this first portion of our session, and then we're actually going to jump in and engage you with some ideas and thoughts about where we're all headed together. So MaryLynn, let me start with you, a 30-plus professional, but actually an HR professional is where you got started before you went into the association world. And over a 30-year career, what was the pivotal moments as you look back to say, that's when I became a better association professional, and how did you do that?
Well, I fell into the field, as you described earlier. My organization was a member of the Management Association, and I was recruited to come to work there. And I thought I would spend a few years at the association and then find my way back into an HR role in industry. But the more I got involved with the association community in Chicagoland and also nationally, I started really thinking about combining my home field, HR, with association management and thought it was such a great blend. And I really found that the mission of our organization, as well as the community and the opportunity to learn and grow and serve a larger group of members as opposed to just serving one organization, really fit not only my personality but my skill set, and I had much more passion around that than going back into an HR role. So that was the pivotal moment where the call of the association, the mission of our organization, and the industry as a whole was much more compelling than my original career path.
But you got engaged in your association early.
Very much so.
Right, so this idea for all of us with our members or looking at building new associations, this idea about getting engaged, jumping in, and that opens up all sorts of other paths for you to figure out. And I assume along the way, you also picked up some professional accreditations.
I sure did, not only in the HR arena, but in 2000, I was encouraged by my peer group in the Chicagoland area to study for and sit for my certified association executive. And that was also a pivotal moment where I think I made the decision that this is going to be a long-term career path for me, not just an episodic, rung on the ladder.
Right, but interesting that you've always maintained both, right?
Oh,
you've always maintained your HR credentials, and that's really, the heart and soul of who you are, yet also became a obviously very accomplished CEO of a volunteer organization.
Well, and part of that is being a good role model for my team. So many of my team members have certifications not only in the association arena, but in HR and in other areas that they specialize in. So my desire to be a lifelong learner as well as a good role model for the team that I motivate each and every day, I think that being accredited, having certifications is essential.
Great, thank you. Vicki, let me turn to you, another 30-plus year veteran of the industry and many different sides. You've been in standalone associations, so one that has its own permanent staff. You've been in an association management company. Tell us a little bit about your path, because you really made a jump. You started in development, as I understand, and then really made a broader jump that set the course for the rest of your career.
Yeah, I actually started in meetings as a meeting planner and had moved my way up to leading a meetings department for a large association, and was starting to get a little burnt out. And my children were very young at the time, and I was thinking about maybe becoming a stay-at-home mom. And just at that moment, my supervisor, the executive director, offered me the position of development director in the association. So I would be responsible for all of the business development and fundraising for a $13 million association. And I jumped on the opportunity and really see that as my pivotal moment, because it opened up to me so many other aspects of the organization and the management of the organization and how it functions outside of that one particular area of meeting planning. And it was actually while I was development director that I too sat for my CAE, and part of the reason why I decided to do it then was it was to continue that learning experience, to find out what else I didn't know, because it was that moving into that development role had just been so eye-opening to me, and then studying and sitting for that CAE continued that process.
So it was really accepting the challenge to step out of your comfort zone.
Absolutely.
From meeting planning to development.
Yeah.
And then how did you kind of go from, those are two pretty specific areas of association management, to gain the skills that you needed and use today in being the CEO?
So after being the development director for about 5 years, I then made the switch from a standalone association to an AMC, an association management company, and served as the executive director for the company's largest client. It was my first opportunity to sit in that executive director chair, and I also got to interact and share knowledge with all of my other executive director colleagues who I worked with. It is a great way to start off in that executive director role if you believe that is the path you want to take. AMCs are a fantastic opportunity to do that. It's very, very safe. You have a lot of people around you who can support you. You will have partners or owners or what have you who will really help to guide you and mentor you through the process. You have other colleagues sitting right there with you who are doing the exact same thing, who you can share with on a day-to-day basis. It's confidential. Everybody's working towards the same goals. And because of that, I was then able to move up within the AMC world and ultimately take a vice president position in managing an actual company, and then make the move now to a CEO, and felt very comfortable when I made this move that I had collected the knowledge and the skills to do this job.
So an AMC is an association management company, which is a fairly well-established concept in North America. How many from the rest of the globe are aware of the concept of the AMC when we use that terminology? So a few of you. So these are basically for-profit companies that provide management services to not-for-profit associations. So we basically provide the full range of management services to nonprofits. We're their back office, if you will. We support and staff the volunteers and do all the day-to-day management. It's a particularly well-developed model in North America and Europe, in the association space, and starting to grow in other areas of the globe. But what you just heard Vicki say is one of the unique things about how else you gain knowledge in our field. And while certifications are certainly one way to do it, exposing yourself to different places that are providing broader management experience to associations and services to associations is another path that's been very successful for association professionals in the US and Europe, and something to think about that's growing in other portions of the world now as well. And certainly last but not least, Debra, another seasoned professional, if I can use that term, from Chicago. And it strikes me that you were kind of challenged at one point in your career to do everything at once from a professional development standpoint.
Yeah.
And what did that open up? What was the catalyst for that, and what did that open up for you?
Well, I worked for a healthcare association, and I worked for a very strong-minded CEO who really believed in professional development. So within the course of a year, I finished my master's degree and completed my thesis. I sat for the CAE exam, and I became board certified in healthcare management. And then I wanted to run and sit on a desert island for a while, but I didn't. But you know, as opposed to like MaryLynn, who came in with her HR background and then became the association person, I kind of went the other direction, where I was an association person and then I got board certified in healthcare management because I was basically working at a healthcare organization. And as it turns out, that ended up getting me to my next position, which was another healthcare organization, and then has attracted a lot of healthcare clients to my practice. So it was really interesting to just sort of say, what is it that I love about this? I never really wanted to be a generalist. I didn't desire to be an association CEO. I knew that I loved education, and I really kind of focused on a more vertical path than really kind of being a generalist. And it was interesting because I was seeing my colleagues jump around from different department to different department because they wanted to be a CEO. And I completely understood why they did that. They wanted to get expertise in different areas of the association, and it has served them well in their path to become a CEO. But I made a decision to stay where I was and become, you know, more expert at what I was doing because I kind of had an inkling that I wanted to start my own company.
Right. So what I find so interesting about this is, again, think about their paths, right? And how they took their passion and found a way to go with it where they wanted to go within the association space. One started out as an HR professional and wanted to stay an HR professional, but because she got involved with the association world, grew within that, but maintains her passion and still lives in the HR space. Another one branched out, became an association, an expert in all areas of association management, and then became the CEO of an association. And yet we have another one that became an entrepreneur and still lives in the association space. So was able to take her passion of education and training and development of executives and bring that into the association space. So this whole idea that you can come at this from so many different directions, and once you're in it, you can change those directions to where you want to take your career, where and how you want to develop within the association world. So I think that really is a great spectrum of how and where you can choose to engage and then think about a forward path. And I bet if you talked around the table, you'll find each and every one of you has a similar different path in here. And for those that are newer in the association community or thinking about how we mentor others that are younger in the associations behind us, or those students that we may be talking to and working with, and important to help them see that there are many different paths for them to grow their careers within the association space as well. Because you've got to find what excites you, right? We all know that. Do what you love, and you're never really working. So part of our job as leaders is to help people find that and then help them see their own paths forward or help direct them to spell out and find their own paths forward are really, I think, some interesting things to think about, how you did it and then how you can help the next generation coming up through find their way. Because as you spoke about yesterday, the world is changing faster than we all actually can deal with. We have enough to try and keep current ourselves with what's happening, but this responsibility we have to reach back and help guide and move the next generation forward is certainly one of our other responsibilities, and how we choose to do that and how forcefully we help people marry those passions is, I think, one of the great opportunities we have as leaders as we continue to go forward. So let's change focus just a little bit, and this is where I'd like to get you engaged with us here. And the technology we're using is Slido. You used it yesterday, so you might want to get your utensils out, your utilities, and everything that you need to do with it. And I'm going to give you a minute to log on so you know you're ready for the first question. And Dean, if we could have the first question up for our audience. And this is really asking me a question, and you're already answering it. Oh, gee, what sources do you turn to for ongoing career development and learning? So if you haven't voted, please go ahead and vote. That could represent just one vote up there at the moment. So go ahead. There were a couple of options for you. And we'll take just another minute because that sounds almost too good to be true. There we go. Okay, that looks a little more realistic. Everybody voted? Good. Well, that's a pretty good spread. I think as I look at it, one of the things that I think we're learning, and ASAE is such a great opportunity, as are all the other association of associations that are here in the room, for really pushing out new ideas and new thoughts for us as association leaders. And this idea of foresight and our role as executives and our role as board members of associations, this idea of foresight and constantly scanning about what the trends are, about what's happening. So what we see here, and probably we should have had another option for you, is really where else do you go to get that information? Because again, so much is happening so quickly. So a quick question I would have for the panelists here is, while we provided these 4 options for people to look at, what else do you do to kind of do that? Where do you scan? Where do you go to look for what's next? What you may need to be worrying about? How do you do that?
So
I'll
I'll start. And it's sort of one of the answers here, and that is other nonprofit executives. And one of the ways that brought me here is I sit on the Executive Management Section Council at ASAE, who has provided a resource to association executives that are their topics, essentially, their areas of particular concern or issues that those working in the association community can use with small groups, create brown bag lunch groups in your area, either in your particular subject area or age group or what have you, to talk through and get ideas from your colleagues and others working in this space. Deb and MaryLynn and I actually belong to a women's executive group in the Chicago area. It's a very small ad hoc group. Everything that we discuss is confidential. And I have to say, I learn more in those conversations that we have about that sometimes I didn't even know I needed to know. I think we're going back to that matrix yesterday of one of those strange green corners of what I didn't know that I needed to know. I mean, I get a ton of information from these conversations, everything from sort of the inside track on vendors in our community and who does absolutely fantastic work and maybe who doesn't, to particular issues that somebody might be dealing with in their organization and how they're dealing with them. And it sort of gives you that little light that that's something I better be watching out for, because it sounds like that is exactly something that could pop up within our organization as well. It's also a great resource. I know I can call any one of those individuals at any time on a particular question just to bounce something off of them. I think once you especially start getting into an executive level role, it's absolutely critical to have that kind of a network in your work life. The education that you need or find valuable starts to become less and less, and it is much more about relying on colleagues and their experiences.
MaryLynn, how about you when you look kind of, and I'm going to make you go outside your network. So first of all, having a broad network is certainly one way to do that, to tap into. Where do you go outside of your network? What are your resources? How do you keep up with what's happening in this region of the world?
Reading, watching things online. I mean, network was going to be my answer too, and I was also going to say all of the above for all of those. So just constantly scanning the environment, picking up not only books, as was one of the questions earlier on, what are you reading, but also just snippets of things, and then pursuing the knowledge. If it's something I feel is going to impact my organization, I serve a diverse array of industries. So staying on top of what's happening in a wide array of environments to see what's coming down the pike in terms of how we're going to be best able to serve our member organizations is critical, and what's happening around the world impacts my members. So making sure that I'm reading the news or watching the news, listening, hearing, and then pursuing the knowledge that I need to be able to plan appropriately and be strategic about my decisions.
Right, so the idea, it's all of it, it's everything.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to be kind of doing it all. We've got to be working with our network and be able to reach out when we have, but also keep that constant head up and scan. Deborah, how about from your standpoint?
I would say two things primarily, and definitely the news. I always tell groups, because I work like MaryLynn across a lot of different industries. You take a world event and you connect the dots back to your own profession or industry, there are implications. And there are implications around education, around knowledge sharing, around practices. When something happens in the world, good or bad, we have an opportunity to educate. So I always like to say, look outside, pick your head up and look outside your industry, look at the world at large, and then figure out what does that mean for your members, and how do you help them understand that. I think the other thing is looking toward business and for-profit organizations for practices that can be then, the lens can be put over the nonprofit community, because oftentimes we're all talking to each other so much that we are regurgitating a lot of the very good ideas, but they're not new ideas. So I think sometimes it's important to look to, innovative companies outside of our sector that are doing interesting things, and then again, helping nonprofits understand how do you tie that back to our community and what it means to serve members.
Right, that's a great idea, and certainly something we practice in the event space, because as many of us know, the corporate world has budgets to do things that as nonprofits we typically can't do, but we can take the idea and say, how do I apply that idea in my space? Or this trend is starting to happen in the world, what does it mean for my group? What does it mean for us in terms of where we do that? So most of us sitting up here, and I venture to say most of us in the room, have our industry certifications, which is basically a baseline knowledge that we understand the industry that we're working in this case, association management. Then is this combination of what we do here and what we just talked about pretty much how we stay up to speed? I mean, that, and obviously dialogue with all of our clients and customers and colleagues all the time, but what's the next level?
I think it's going to change all the time. Mm-hmm. I think our sources of information are going to change. The sources we can trust will change. I think that we need to look at some of the new disruptions that are happening out there, Bitcoin and, a variety of things. Some of them were mentioned yesterday, how that could affect our own professions. So I think, one of the things that I like to do every year is I like to do something way outside my association sphere. So as an example, last year I went to something that was sort of, it was born in Google, and it's called Search Inside Yourself, and it's a nonprofit organization. It took me way outside my comfort zone. I was looking inside myself all day long, and boy, you better like what you see or work on it, make an obligation and a commitment to work on it. But it was something that was just, it informs my work. So it gave me additional fuel to kind of bring into this community. And I think, again, sometimes we need our inside the community sources and we need our outside the community sources. And I've talked to more and more people that, once a year they push themselves to do something different, because there are, again, people that I turn to now that I never knew existed, resources that I turn to now that I never knew existed. So I think just constantly searching for new things is an imperative.
That's great. Is there anybody in the audience that goes somewhere we haven't talked about to stay relevant, to kind of scan across and around the world that's a little bit different from what we've talked about here? Any other brilliant source that we should all know about, or do you want to keep it to yourself because it's that good? Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
You can put my mic on, or I can use this one. I was always trained to go to non-industry conferences, nothing to do with learning and development or training or associations, to see what ideas they might have that they're doing that we could apply to our business. So completely outside. Yeah.
Exactly. This idea of really stepping outside the association world to see what else is going on. Martin, I know you're always looking at more interesting places than I am. Give me a couple ideas. Needs a microphone over here.
Thank you, Gregg. About once a month, I do what I call a random walk online. usually because I'm looking for weird and wonderful, interesting speakers who aren't on the circuit for our own Congress. And I'll take a single intellectual idea, and then I'll just follow that and see where it goes. Just to give you an example of what can come out of that, for our Congress in Sarawak, I found a son of Vietnamese boat people who'd moved to Australia, trained himself to become a professional magician, won prizes, learned that there were psychological business lessons from direction, misdirection, attention, lack of attention, and started then giving business talks and was thinking of getting into speaking. And so I just sent the guy an email, said, hey, you sound really interesting. I see you're thinking of getting into speaking. How would you like to talk to 800 people from 75 countries? And so we got him for virtually nothing, and he's now speaking all over the world. I think he's at PCMA in January coming up, or was he at the last one? I can't remember now. But that sort of thing actually educates you as well, because you start realizing just how much you don't know. But occasionally you have to make a little bit of time and just say, for the next half hour, I'm just going to go and see what's out there.
Yep. Kind of jump into the stream and see where it goes.
Yes, correct.
Right. And then follow it from there. Great. Up front here.
I actually get out of my association space by looking at the associations associated with my hobbies. So, for instance, I've had an interest in astronomy, and I've gone to AAS meetings, and I've joined the Planetary Society, and just seeing how those organizations operate with not only the academic model on one end, but the Planetary Society, which has a huge community outreach aspect to it, and looking how they deal with volunteerism in different ways and membership development, because their techniques are both very, very different. So I found that very valuable.
Excellent. That's great. Again, kind of forcing you to shift your mind and think differently. That's great. Thank you. And I see one more.
I just wanted to add that I think very often we do things the same way all the time. And I think you can learn a lot from your customers or your clients if you listen, because I think there's a difference between hearing and listening. So very often the customer might have an idea, perhaps they don't articulate it all that well, but they might have new ideas or do things differently. And I find that I learn from the customers, and in situations and committees, all those people have something new to contribute. And if you really listen and tune in, and we're not that busy and we're rushing around to get the job done, but if you really listen, I think that there's a lot to be learned from the different individuals and the committees that we serve.
Absolutely. And in your role as a PCO or us in association management, we see a broad range of customers in all different industries, which also makes it quite interesting. It forces us to really step outside and think a little bit differently, because we're working in different industries all at the same time in that regard. Let's go to question 2 and shift, just so I stay on time. Thank you. So, Dina, if we could get the second Slido question up. So this is really starting to look at what we're thinking and talking about in terms of globalization, and we wanted to get a sense from you in the room. What do you see happening to the future of your organization looking ahead? Obviously, this will be slightly driven by who you are and what organization you represent, but nonetheless. So I was recently, you mentioned some of the work that you do. I'm a Vistage member as well, which is an international organization of CEOs, and we were at a regional meeting, and we probably had about 300 CEOs of organizations of all types, for-profit companies, sitting in a room, and the question was asked, how many of you currently think what happens globally is affecting your business? And I tell you, maybe 5 to 10 hands went up in that room, and I was just amazed Because here are CEOs of organizations, ostensibly all from probably $5 to $200 million. And I don't care what industry you're in, for them to not have a sense that what was happening globally would impact their industry and therefore have an impact on them, I found absolutely extraordinary. And so then there's the question of what happens out there that impacts us, or as we look at it from our standpoint as an association, what are we doing? Are we going globally? How are we growing to do what we want to do? And as you can see from this result, the overwhelming majority are sensing some expansion globally as opposed to anything else. What's your approach has been to it as it looks for your associations? Vicki?
SLES has characterized itself so far as a global organization, and they are in year 4 of a 5-year growth plan. They attempted to do some activities in Asia a few years ago and probably didn't approach it quite right, and so put a pause on that and switched their eye to Europe and have had much better success. I think they used a different approach that made more sense. But what we most importantly are doing is now we're going to really walk our talk. Don't share this with anybody, but we're actually going to completely restructure our governance, which is going to be announced at our annual meeting in February. And the governance structure currently is your very typical. We have a very large conference, and there's a lot of committees that focus on the conference, and we have some committees that just focus on Europe, and we have committees that just focus on Asia. That's all been broken down, and everything is now integrated. There is no committee that has, except for 2 programming committees, there is no committee that has a geographic name to it anymore. Every committee is now charged with thinking globally. So the membership group is charged with thinking about membership and engagement for SLES on a global scale, and they will have members from around the world on those committees. The charters are all being rewritten and are going to require representation from the various regions that our members live in. Our members are working in life sciences, life science research, which is a global industry, and they already know how to work and think in a global manner. We need to do the same as a society and really project that we are really thinking and acting globally.
So it's become a strategic imperative, and then you realize that actually your governance was getting in the way of achieving that strategic imperative.
Correct.
Okay. MaryLynn, how about your organization?
So we're a state-based organization, but that being said, we do absolutely no marketing outside of Illinois, but we have members in 35 states, and 75% of our members are global businesses. So we are in the process of a rebranding initiative, and I have a survey fresh off the presses from last week, and the overwhelming response to the question with regard to how could we serve you more effectively was to have more information and knowledge and resources around doing business globally. So even though we're a state-based organization, the demands on us to be have expertise, not only about Illinois law, US federal law, but about what's happening around the world from a human resources, workforce, employment, and talent perspective is increasing daily.
Right, so that's interesting. You're actually being pushed by your members to provide more and more information along this line because they're realizing that they work in a global space.
Exactly.
Right.
So for us to be effective, we need to have those resources available to them.
Sure, great. And Debra, what do you see from your clients here? Again, looking at a much broader base.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that as we do a lot of market research with association members around education, and what we find is for international organizations, they need specific strategies in different parts of the world. It's definitely not one size fits all, particularly when it comes to places that have been traditionally face-to-face or in-person education. There are access issues, there are resource issues, there are issues of just people having the ability to come up to speed on the latest and the greatest. So there needs to be different education strategy in different parts of the world. And then the other thing is just that there's such a trend toward digital in international associations because we are realizing, of course, that one way to democratize education is to make it accessible to all. So, you don't have to be that person that has to get on a plane and go halfway around the world to a face-to-face event to really get the latest and greatest. We want to make sure that people at the beginning of their career all the way through the end of their career have access to the best information around their profession.
Well, and I think the thing that we're all learning is that the approach to this, there's really now much more science about how you go global. And I think that applies whether we're coming from the North America out or anywhere else out in terms of where that's starting to go. And we all need more education about that, right? It's one of the reasons we're here in this room together. And with 74% of you thinking about going globally, there's a lot of research about how to do it right, what the approaches are in terms of how to do that. And sometimes groups have tried and realized, oops, that wasn't it. And for really earlier, there wasn't a model for this. Now there are some very good models about how this can be done. And I just wonder, in looking around the room, is there anyone who thinks they have an answer to going global that you'd like to share? There, great. Can we get a microphone? Thank you.
Hello, hi. Thank you for this lovely interactions. Well, in fact, I'm going to talk from 2 points of view. One point of view is what we're currently doing on the level of our association, and I'm going to bring up some, unfortunately, failures of big associations who came from the States and failed in this part of the world. And I think I will pinpoint, because I was involved with them as an alumni of a US school. I come from Boston University, I trained at BU, so I was involved in that program, and I saw what happened and how it failed. On the local level, we established the Emirates Pediatric Dentistry Club, so we represent pediatric dentists in the UAE. We started quite a few years ago, and today we are like 200 or 200 of us. And every time we organize an event in this part of the world, we have all the neighboring countries who come and attend our event. Because like yesterday, Mr. El-Merri said, he used the word, he said the drought for knowledge. So whenever we have a good scientific program, our colleagues from the neighboring countries will come and attend. And we've always had huge successes. Part of it is that Dubai is the destination of choice, but part of it is also what we were offering. Because we had pediatric dentists coming from neighboring countries who don't have any event happening. And they were eager to look for something that make an improvement in their daily life. I'm talking about dealing with children dentistry. But then when I want to talk about the failure of what happened when some entities came along and they were educational or in the healthcare business or in the education business, there is always this demeaning factor whereby we don't have to offer this part of the world what we offer in the US. So we had professors who used to come here, and though they were working very long hours in the States, when they came here, no, this is the sunshine. We have to take off at 3 o'clock and go to the beach. You know, this attitude toward work and the way you look at the rest of the world as not being at the right level or not meeting the expectations doesn't really work. So it has to be on a one-to-one basis, even if it's to teach the other entity or implement improvement or standards or guidelines. Because at the end of the day, all of these big efforts failed. Because there's a human component, and when we first go to the States, they talk about cultural shock. Well, this cultural shock is reversible. So when people come from other parts of the world, there is also this cultural shock. It's not the way we dress or what we eat. It's in our daily practices, how we envision this other party. And I think whoever want to come globally and make change has to keep that in mind every day on the platform.
Great.
You bring up a really good point, though. I agree with you. You have to accept the culture of where you're going and understand it to be successful. But the point that you brought up is that I think we also need to be not afraid of failure. We need to start thinking about these types of efforts, expanding globally or what have you, is essentially running experiments. And as long as you have the data to support why you should be running that experiment and accepting the fact that you might fail and that you could learn from that failure and then continue on and grow. I think associations are very leery and consider the word failure a dirty word. And if you're not using it properly, then it's really a shame. But you can learn so much from that and continue to eventually be successful. But it's a mindset change.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you. Nikki, I'd actually like to call on you. MCI has done amazing work in helping organizations strategize about going global, and I wonder if you could share the biggest failure when you look across the board, where you've had to re-educate association clients to understand what going global and the strategy about going global really involves.
Thank you, Gregg. Yeah, you put me on the spot there, but Vicki gave a brilliant sort of entry into that discussion, I think, because as you said, associations are very risk averse and don't tend to want to have all the answers and all the T's crossed and I's dotted, etc., before actually doing anything. And I do agree with you that stepping outside your comfort zone and taking baby steps, we were talking about bite sizes with volunteers. Going global is exactly the same thing. It's taking baby steps, it's working in a particular area, it's doing market research. We do a lot of market research, helping associations, because the globe's a big world. So, helping associations to look about where in the globe, around the world, should you go first. And it's data, as you said, Vicki, it's data that speaks to that. So our mantra is, don't just jump in because you've got an enthusiastic volunteer leader that says, hey, we need to do a meeting in Vietnam because we've got, the opportunity. If the data isn't there, there is no business case for it, and then the board is not going to be comfortable. So doing the market research, finding out what are the needs for your association in a particular market, how can you fill the gaps, and being willing to adapt. Because it's not a copy-paste model. What works in Europe doesn't necessarily work in Asia. What works in the US doesn't necessarily work in Europe unless there is some kind of adaptation. So an openness, and the data and the market research allows the board to feel comfortable, and absolutely you are going to fail. I mean, I have a number of associations that have tried to take the same US membership model into India. India, you have membership for life, it costs $100. There aren't the same sort of benefits. If you take $150 membership, $150 membership model into India and every year renewing, your market's going to say to you, what are you actually doing this for? So data, research, know why you're doing it, take it in baby steps, learn from what you're doing, and then continue to expand.
Great, excellent, thank you. One last comment?
I want to make a comment about the market research. Thank you for bringing it up. It has to be genuine. Because in the program that I was involved in, we had market research done by big companies, and then when it failed, we went back to these business models, and we found out that the data they had provided us weren't accurate. They wanted it to work to start with, so they offered data that met their expectations, and they weren't very valid. So we saw the whole thing happening. So the market research is very important, but it has to be very genuine.
Great, good points. Thank you. One final flip of direction here, if we could, for our third question on Slido. There we go. So this is meant for everyone in the room, but there's a lot of us with gray hair that 5 years may be too long to look. But the idea is, what do you see happening in your career in the next 5 years? So the last one, I wonder, are we retiring? Maybe. So I'll give you just another minute. But interesting, if half the room is looking for a significant change, we may want to have a resume posting out in the community area, since there seemed to be some interest in moving around here. That's really fascinating. So we have a lot of change. And that's good. That's good for our industry. That's clearly good for you. And kind of brings us full circle around to finding your path and figuring out what that next step actually is and what's best for you. Which leads me into, the final question that I have for our panelists. When you think about what could an association offer that would increase your level of engagement as a member, right? So what could the association forum do? What could your organizations do that would make a member want to get more engaged? And is that list of things different from what you would want to provide to your employees as an employer? So the idea being, is this really different when you think about what are those things that we want engagement to look like? What do you have to provide for successful engagement on the membership side versus successful engagement on the employee side? And I wonder, do you see any big differences in looking at those two audiences as we think about engagement? Debra?
I am very involved in ASAE and Association Forum, and what I always yearn for is just more contact with the association itself and other people, and I think it's available. I think it's more my limitations, to be really honest. So I feel like, I love going to the headquarters office. I like meeting with the staff. I like meeting other executives. I love having a core group of colleagues in Chicago, but I really like having a national group of colleagues as well. I think it's just has expanded me in so many different ways, and then look forward to having a group of international colleagues as well. So I think it's more a limitation on my own part. I think digital is really important, but my own personal preference is I love being face-to-face with people. That's where I get inspired. And so it's really on me. And as far as other people go that work for me, I think it's always a trade-off about resources, right? Can you afford to send people to an annual meeting? Can you afford to send someone to a committee meeting out of district kind of a thing? But I think we all need quick access to content answers through a lot of different ways that both of these groups have accessible message boards and communities and that kind of a thing, and white papers and best practices, and then I think we need to be together face to face.
To do it. MaryLynn?
I lead a 40 staff member team, and I spend a lot of time making sure that they're engaged and trying to provide opportunities for them to be engaged. And they're looking for meaning in their work. They're looking for developmental opportunities. They're looking for challenges. They're looking for a way to make their passion connect with the work we do. And I think there's a lot of similarity to the things we're looking for in our association experiences. I agree with Deb. We have so many opportunities. Our limitation is often time and money. But to the extent, I loved Susan's example before about those micro opportunities. If you find some ways to get involved, and I encourage my team members to get involved in their own industry groups or their hobbies so that they can gain the same sort of connections and resources that will bring value, because your work life is just one component of being engaged. And if you're not being filled up, if your vessel's not being filled in multiple ways, work alone probably isn't going to do it. And I think that's why our industry is so special and unique, because there are so many opportunities to connect with others, to learn and grow. So a lot of overlap.
Great. Vicki?
I would agree with both Deb and MaryLynn. My team is small, but we have executive level positions, mid-level, entry-level, and I really see it varies based on either the particular work that the individuals are doing or the level that they're at. But they are always wanting to be engaged and wanting to learn more. And it does cost money. I mean, let's face it, it is a major investment, but it's really, really important to make that investment. When I came into this organization, I increased the professional development budget and said to the board, look, you only serve to benefit from this. I recognize this is not a small amount of money here, but ultimately the society and you as a board and the volunteers volunteers, and everybody that we're serving every day is going to benefit by ensuring that your team is continually growing. And it's worth making that investment.
Well, it's interesting when you think about all the challenges that we're facing as both employers and as association leaders, when you realize the world is changing very quickly, and what they're now saying, any young person entering the workforce today is probably going to have 6 or 7 different careers. And you start looking at that, and it really changes everything about how we think about the membership model for associations. It thinks about how we need to think about people making commitments to our organizations as employers. It changes, and this idea of a lifelong commitment for a member, much less a lifelong career for people coming in to work with us, is probably not going to be the case anymore. So how do we take all of this? How do we take everything we're talking about today and figure out what does that mean for us as organizations, and how do we do it? An interesting concept that I read about recently, this idea of really you go in with a new employee and say, let's talk about the alliance we're going to have for the next 5 years. And let's take it in steps. Because A, that may be all you're going to get, and let's get very clear what I need from you and what you need from me to make those next 5 years be as successful as possible. Interesting thought to approach that from a membership organization, much the same way. We don't expect to have you for life. What can we do for you in the next 3 to 5 years that would be meaningful? And then how do we deliver on that? And if we start, again, kind of taking that bite-sized concept and bring it down, bring it down, bring it down, gets really interesting. So I think there's a lot that we can continue to learn together. I appreciate everybody's input, and would you give one more round of applause for our talented team?